Good afternoon. Here is Ukraine Media Center, 121st day of Ukrainian resistance. I'm Zaitseva-Chipak, and we are launching our next briefing. As it is well known, yesterday Ukraine got the candidate status for the EU, and today is a great date because it is exactly the 4 months since the war started. But we will speak not about candidacy and not about the war, but we will speak about um, a little bit unexpected topic, but the one that has appeared to be extremely important. This is environment. And today we have Ina Pidluska, Deputy Executive Director at International Renaissance Foundation. We also have online Oles Lisnychuk, the leading analyst at Umberto Analytical Group. Welcome. We have Natalia Andrusevych, Chair of the Board at Society and Environment Resource and Analysis Center. And we have Natalia Zaitseva-Chipak, Sociologist, CEO at Socioinform. So let us probably start with the following question to Inna. Inna, please tell us, why is environment so much important today, and why do we need to speak about it during the war? Because Ukraine is Europe. Because yesterday Ukraine finally got this candidate status, and this means that amidst this strategic progress towards Europe, which has finally become strategic, the issues of healthy environment and treatment of the environment as a value and treatment of the right to healthy environment is an important one, the critical one for many countries of the EU, and we hope that it is also critical for Ukraine. When we started working with the topic of environment within the environmental development and advocacy uh, development, we followed the logic that when all Ukrainians considered the environment to be a value and consider themselves to be the people who could contribute to environment becoming more healthy for the generations to come. So if we have this approach, people will be more motivated in getting interested in the policies that predetermines the sort of environment that we have. Environmental policy, let's call it, the same as industrial policy, policy of working with waste, um, biodiversity preservation policy. So when people deal with those policies, are interested in those policies and keep asking questions, the people whom they elect, when they ask how the state ensures the right of a person to a healthy environment, then this will lead to the appearance of the new way of thinking, and the environment will be a priority. Why are we talking about environment when we are having war? When Ukraine is fighting for its survival and is fighting for the right to be a free European country, why should we speak about the environment? That's because it's really important for the people to keep thinking about the future and to keep thinking on what Ukraine is going to be like after it wins, because it will definitely will. We don't know when exactly that will happen, and we may just imagine how much damage and harm will be brought to Ukraine, in particular to the environment. But we already start speaking about rebuilding and recovery. So that's why we are doing this. We are supporting NGOs because we are a resource for the civil society organizations, because public engagement is something extremely important for the future recovery of Ukraine. To be human centered, human oriented, and the one that would make Ukraine better. It's pointless to restore what we had. It would be good to build something better. And within this better, one of the priorities is the environment. Healthy and safe environment, green restoration, green rebuilding. That is all about great capacity and great opportunities, in particular in the context of the current EU candidate status of Ukraine. And as and with this policy, we will engage communities, and this will be the recovery that will bring Ukraine and its society great new opportunities, discoveries, prospects, and inspiration to uh, follow this green recovery in all aspects of its work. And the last thing I'd like to mention is why we are here today and why we are sharing this information about the research we have conducted. We were pleasantly impressed how many Ukrainians consider environment a priority, how many of Ukrainians think that this is something that really matters for them, and they think that they can positively affect the environment for the environment to become healthier and safer. So, and my colleagues will tell you how did we come to know about this. Thank you. So we have Oles Lisnychuk, and he will present the study Environment and War, monitoring the media and Ukrainian search terms for the presence of the topic. So Oles, if you could show the research and focus on the things which are of utmost importance with the most important figures and findings, and then we will discuss the consequences and the conclusions altogether. Thank you. I would ask the technical staff to share the presentation. Thank you. So this is the study, the idea of which, well, I'm sorry if we could also show it in the studio. So the idea was born when we saw the first problems in restructuring our activity and starting our daily activities in the wartime. Within the International Renaissance Foundation, we have had the initiative, the Environmental Policy and Advocacy Initiative for Ukraine, working for several years. So, in cooperation with this initiative, we have prepared, or rather, we tried to to analyze the problems. And please move on the slides. We tried to see what the problems are and how within the information field, which has definitely changed since the beginning of the aggression, the environmental topics are present, how much they are present, and how much some of the aspects of the environmental policy are present there, and whether there have been any major shifts or changes as compared to the pre-war period. And we also had a look over the very period on the study. So please, let's move on with my presentation. One more slide, the next slide, yes, the next. So since we agreed to do this, we starting with the 4th of April, this was the 40th day of the war. And it so happened that this overlapped with the part of the full-scale hostilities, which is now called the first phase of the war. In particular, this is important for reflecting the environmental topic because the enemy really wanted to hit the infrastructure, technological resources of the country, and therefore it was trying to make uh, our political authorities and the Ukrainian society in general to comply with its ultimatums, with its requirements. And this style of war, this style of aggression, actually evoked a rather substantial impression that would relate it to the environment because of the great number of losses in the environment. That's what we have recorded in our survey. And its media part. And we have also used the instrument of deep trend analysis. Like we tried to find what the topics are and what the dynamics of addressing these topics is for Ukrainians uh, from the beginning of the year and up till the beginning of April. And therefore, we were able to have a look at the changes that could be traced before the first phase of the war and before the pre-open aggression stage. So you can see the dates, the chronology, um, were the final points of our media monitoring. And our third block dealt mostly with the analysis of the public broadcast and statements of the president, who, in this period, became the voice of Ukraine, both to the outside and inside the country, because he kept actively communicated on a daily basis with the society in relation to all the processes, all the challenges, and relevant issues that kept arising in the context of the aggression. Please, the next slide. Here you can see the search base for the survey as far as media is concerned. I will not focus on this. Let me just tell that this is a rather large scale uh, corpus of sources, and we uh, used content analysis, of course, and within the search base, we conducted a search of a number of categories, which intuitively, on the basis of our prior experience, um, was were chosen as the categories that could be representative of the vision of echo problems in the Ukrainian media space. The next slide, please. And here you can see the structure of the research and the topics that uh, were subjected to content analysis. There were 10 major media monitoring topics. One of them was larger than the others. It was kind of the umbrella one, environment and war, which has become a component of the title of our research. The other 9 topics were more focused, and they were analyzed in terms of the search of the database the database was developed via exact coincidences and overlaps in Ukrainian and Russian languages. It can be pointed out. Well, I'm sorry. Please, the next. This is the next slide already. So in fact, in this survey, you can see how, on the basis of the analysis of the obtained databases, we arranged visualization by some directions. In particular, this is general dynamics of mentions, just in terms of quantity. Then the types of mass media were the topic was mentioned, the levels of the media in terms of the coverage of information, and the profiles of sources. Uh, Considering the semiotics majoring of those sources. Please, next slide. Let me mention a couple of conclusions we made on the basis of our study, just in brief. We were a bit frustrated with the dynamics, or rather surprised with the dynamics in addressing environmental topics among Ukrainian media, because we expected that the interest in this topic would rather be low, and we actually meant to study why the interest was lower. But we saw that it was vice versa, because most of the categories which we were researching were the categories where the general dynamics of mentions was upwards. but for the ones, several ones that were related to the first days of the war, in particular radiation pollution and radiation threats. In general, the uh, growing attention is confirmed by the study of Google Trends, because within the Google trends you can see, in particular in March and April, that there is growing interest. The graphs, the diagrams, show a considerably higher attention paid by Ukrainians to those issues. This is a kind of a manifestation of the conscious and consciousness and subconsciousness of Ukrainian Google users. That is the rise in the interest in the issues related to pollution and in some other issues which were covered by our study. But let me mention that this interest and this attention was caused and objectivized by the aspects of life that were affected by the war. And this interest is related to hostilities majorly. Well, there is a subtle logic behind that, of course, because probably before the war, the echo range of topics were more related to the quality of life. Oles, I'm sorry, can you hear me? So the point is that we need to focus on the conclusions in the studio, and then we will speak about the reasons and the causes, and we will then go deeper into this after you briefly tell us about the basic trends. Just continue, but very briefly. Okay. So the problems of survival and existentialism of Ukrainian citizens, society, and the state are also related to the environment. And they have kind of introduced the issues of environment into this context. That's why there is a great attention paid to the consequences of environmental damages and the threats for the environment and for the state and for the society. And an active trend we can trace is recording of the crimes committed by Russia in relation to in the environment, which are sometimes interpreted as ecocide. I've mentioned the president, but it's not only the president. Other representatives of the authorities also contributed to the importance of this range of topics. And let me mention a kind of a controversial issue and a conclusion at the same time, which does not stem exactly from the numerical digital findings of the survey, but we can see it. This is a kind of a synthetic vision of the fact that both via media and via other directions of our work, the environment after the big commencement of the war um, seems to have become a part of our identity. The enemy is attacking it. This means that they perceive it as a component of our identity. That is a part of us. Environment is a part of us, a part of our identity and our sovereignty, and also a part of our fight against the aggressor for our freedom. And finally, the last slide. Two last remarks on my part. Due to such newly identified trends, we've got a window of opportunities for all those interested in environmental topics. We can increase the presence of environmental topic in mass media, and we can improve the quality of this present thanks to expert discussions in the media and in the society in general. And of course, this provides for the sudden improved capacity of environmental thinking development in the Ukrainian society, and it also gives us new opportunities for Ukraine to see itself as an environmentally friendly in the future when the war is over. Ukraine really should care about the green recovery of the country. Thank you. So before we go over to the discussion, let's get back the slides with the conclusions. For us to see those conclusions, please, I would ask our technical team to share the screen with the slide of the presentation. This is the slide with the core four conclusions. And here is my question to Natalia Andrusevych. And what have you been impressed with the most? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. First of all, let me express my gratitude for having invited us, and thanks a lot to the International Renaissance Foundation for this research, because in the times of the war, when you're dealing with the environmental issues, it's really important to see that somebody else is dealing with those issues, that somebody is supporting you. In spite of the fact that this is the key direction of activity of our organization, during the first and the second weeks of the war, we just could not work at the environmental issues. It was extremely complicated, and it was really difficult to get back to this range of topics. So this survey is important because on the one hand, it shows what we have, and on the other hand, it enables us to focus on the future, on the lessons that could be learned from the survey, and on our response or strategies to be built for the future. Yesterday, we read this report at our office, and it was of interest for us what issues are raised. We see this because this is our daily activity, but on the other hand, it was of interest to see these findings in the so-called concentrated format. And it's very good that environmental topics are present in mass media, that mass media speak about it, that specialist organizations, experts keep speaking about those issues. But on the other hand, we have seen a trend in that these environmental issues are directly related to security issues, security of people. Because speaking about those environmental issues, experts link them to specific threats. In particular, this can be seen if we speak about radiation, safety, and chemical threats. I think that there was the greatest splash when it came to Chernobyl, Zaporizhia, nuclear power plants, and people spoke a lot about the environment back then, and there were a lot of mentions in mass media. Well, the risks of air pollution, water pollution, that is also an important topic widely covered. We have a good signal for the future because, we are quite often asked the question, is there any connection between environmental pollution and people's health and safety? And I think that during the wartime, this became absolutely obvious, and that is a good lesson to be learned for the future. It will help us in our work when we connect radiation or pollution to health of people. We will know that this affects security, safety, and health of people. And if we have a look at the European and international trends, so the trends are to speak about the environmental issues in close connection with security issues. So even if we have a wider study, well, I saw that there have been some elements of green energy mentioned in the report. So when we speak about green energy, we directly link it to our energy security. When we speak about green agriculture, we will definitely link it to food security. So this chain could be developed on and on, or let's say we could link green economy to our future in the European Union and access of our goods to the European markets. That's why it's important. In fact, there is one more interesting topic which has not been covered by this study, but is related to the environmental issues. This is the issue of animal protection. And probably we have all seen those pictures during the war, um, which on the one hand show the pain, but on the other hand, they show that Ukrainians are very special in their treatment of animals. We saw people taking dogs, stray dogs from shelters. We saw some volunteers from Mykolaiv Zoo who was selling the tickets for the future just to to buy some food for animals. We saw how bears were relocated from Kiev region to our Lviv region, a shelter for bears, Domazhir. Um, of course, in those news flows, we lack some elements related to environmental protection. Maybe it's logical because we have a wartime and people are thinking about other issues, but nevertheless, waste treatment issue is not raised. We have it raised now in the context of the law, but we didn't have a discourse as to whether we create more waste during wartime, how we treat green areas, forests, woods, rivers, because unfortunately we have heard a lot of news about different illegal constructions and logging of green areas during the war. So this range of topics is also important. And let me have one more explanation as to why these topics arise during the war. The point is that we see huge destructions, and we may just conjure what harm to the environment, to forests, to rivers, to soil waters and soils is being brought. And it's really important that these facts, these destructions are being recorded. And it's important that people are told about this because on the one hand, we need to realize the scale of the and the scope of those consequences, but on the other hand, we need to realize that we will have to spend a lot of time to restore all this after the war. And probably let me mention two points related to the future. Well, first of all, that is the issue to be mentioned in the context of Ukraine's recovery after the war. Inna has partially mentioned this issue. So we are speaking about post-war recovery, how it will be happening. And we claim that this is not just rebuilding of what we used to have, but this should be green-based recovery. That's why green issues are important in this context. And it's also important to take into account the fact that the issues of the environment are important for citizens. That's why really we should have green recovery and reconstruction. And if we have a look at this future plan of Ukraine's recovery, this shouldn't just be the roadmap that has environment as its final paragraph. Environmental issues should be integrated into all the sections of the recovery plan because we see that these topics are important for the state, important for the citizens. And also, in the context of the yesterday's decision of the European Council concerning granting the candidate status to Ukraine, I would like to say that this is also a very good chance of being on the same page with the citizens of the European Union who care about the environment, who care about nature. Several years ago, we ordered a sociological all Ukrainian study of the treatment of the environment by Ukrainians, and the methodology was to compare what Europeans think and what Ukrainians think of the environment. So we saw that there is no difference on the level of values. Both for the EU residents and for Ukrainians, the issue of the environment is really important at the level of 95% of citizens who mentioned that this is important for us. But there is another tricky point here. When we go to specific environmental practices used by citizens, so there is a discrepancy between how Europeans treat the environment and how Ukrainians treat the environment. Well, that's all about waste sorting, about using public transport, about buying local food. So there is some difference, and there is a lot of work to be done in this respect. So that could be a good bridge between the concerns of citizens, even in the times of the war, and development of the future strategies for the years to come. as to what we should do in the future, how we would communicate with the citizens for us to become the EU member, just on not just on paper, but for us to really be have a unified space in terms of values and in terms of behavior. All right, you have mentioned sociology, so let me address Natalia and going over to sociology, social science. Let me ask you, we can see the trend that the interest among people in the environmental aspects is being raised, is going higher. So is it a one-time story? Uh, is it just based on the information which we get now, or is it the behavioral change? You know, I would say that both assumptions are true. We have got both relevancy of the environmental issues in the context of the war, because the situation is getting worse. It becomes the information trigger. And on the other hand, we could speak about behavioral changes and changes of our thinking, way of thinking. Not that quickly, but anyway, the vector is clear, is clearly seen. Why I'm judging, what I'm judging by, in May, several years ago, there was a survey of the importance of ecology in the, I'm sorry, this year, there was the survey, and a lot of residents claim that they consider that there is lack of information about the environment in the times of the war, which means that this topic is important for residents. And another example I would like to show is that 2 or 3 years ago, um, there were certain hierarchies of priorities. Like, you ask a person, what are your greatest concerns? So 2 years ago, environmental issues came and as number 7. People said that, well, military conflict, economic situation, tariffs, corruption. But if you ask direct question, yes or no, everybody claimed that environmental issues are important. Yes, they are important. This is our life, this is our health. And, you know, ecology or environment could be human-centered or nature-centered. When you think not about yourselves, but about animals, how we affect the animals. Could we eat meat, or could we have some natural fur, leather? Um, but this hierarchy of priorities tells us more. Yes, it's important, you know, but tariffs are more important for me. So you may judge by this priority hierarchy. So one of the surveys um, in uh, August 2021 showed that 26% of respondents considered environmental issues a priority, to be a priority, and it was side by side with such threats for the country as corruption, war, and economic hardships, which means that these problems are becoming more important and more relevant for people. That is the survey for 2021. You can see this relevancy by the cases with animals, and you probably remember the story how a peacock was killed and how the public reacted, saying that this person should be punished. So this means that these issues are relevant. And there is one more point. In today's report presented today, we have a great section, the attention on behalf of public figures. Our politicians normally tell what is in demand. They have a survey and then they start speaking on the topics which are important for the society. Do you know what one of the recent initiatives of our president was before the war? That was planting of 1 billion trees in Ukraine. What does it show us? It shows us that politicians have made a study, they have understood that these environmental issues are important for people, and they have arranged a planting of trees. So after great construction, that was priority number 2. And our behavioral change is taking place. It is gradual. It is probably not that much in the context of just environmental considerations. But anyway, ecology is integrated into our life, into our quality of life, via health, via economy, via war, via politics. It is integrated. And when we speak about environmental issues, we should take it into account that people anyway act in an environmental way. We can see that people start sorting waste more. Probably they don't do it in an adequate way, but that's much more in terms of sorting than it used to be. They save resources. Maybe this is economic type behavior, but it is closely interrelated with environmental behavior since there is no limit between the two. Um, I read the report, and there were some information triggers related to the shelling of factories. Was it about economic component or environmental components? I don't know. For many people, they are intertwined. This is one point. If we But this is something that we have inside us. We speak about burning forests, and what is important there? The economic factor, the factor of quality of life, or environment. They are intertwined, they're interrelated. And today we've got a good realization of the fact that environment is all about the quality of our life, and it goes together with the main fields of our activity and activity of the state. But there is another important point I would like to stress, since I was impressed with that in that report. Um, a lot of was mentioned about the things which we don't feel that much, like climate change. Here are bombs, here are missiles coming, here are refugees and IDPs, social disaster, and still we are interested in climate change, global uh, food security. We don't have starvation, but we are interested in global starvation, in global famine. Why? Because we are a component of mankind, a component of Europe, and there are some humanistic requirements behind that. But there is also another point here. That is the point that this range of topics involves us to engage the world in our life. There was war in Syria. Did Ukrainians care about that? Well, they were concerned about that, but I remember that I myself was highly indignant for some 15 minutes, and then I started doing my own business and didn't care about that. But these issues allow us to tell the world that this is not only our problem, that this is going to be your problem if we don't manage to export grain. You're going to have problems if Chernobyl or Zaporizhia nuclear power plants have some disasters there, or if there is some leakage from our chemical plants. And that enables us to show that the world is large and globalized. We require support. This is one more argument for the world to be engaged in helping us establish some order and environmental safety. Humanization of the society during the war is a very interesting trend we have heard of. In spite of the war, we are still having a humanization of the society going on. And I've also heard another interesting point that environmental harm is perceived by people as personal harm, personal damage to them, and the issue of the environment has become more personalized. So let me ask you about the following. How do we talk about ecology and the environment during the war? How do we use this word? Because this word seems to be existing in some parallel reality. And probably it shouldn't be existing now. It's like tourism or something like this. What words should be used while speaking to people about the environment? Because there are bombs and missiles coming, and you are trying to tell them that there should be waste sorting. So, Oles, if you have anything to add, just raise your hand. But people here in the studio can give answers now. Well, I think that first of all, we speak about the environment, which is a part of our lives. And this is a part of what determines the quality of our life. And this is also a component linking every individual, every citizen with their decision making quality by the authorities, as well as with the quality of response to the challenges and threats. These are interrelated things, as mentioned by my colleague. It's really important to understand that we will not be able to think about the environment then, because climate change is coming, and it may be later. It may be too late. we do have other priorities, but these things, environmental issues, are still with us, and the society needs to really be included into this saving of the world. The environmental topics are really important because this is a place where we would live. Yeah, let me add a couple of words um, concerning my vision, how we could communicate and convey the messages. On the one hand, that could be shown as some issues of development. War is going on, then there will be a short recovery stage, but nobody has ever canceled strategic development, and strategical development is all about sustainable development, which means that the trends present in the European Union, of which we are willing to become a member, um, are developing in spite of the events in Ukraine, which are also affecting them. But anyway, they're implementing the European Green Deal, which means that the environment is a part of any field of social societal life, because it's not only about birds, rivers, waters. That's about economy, transport, infrastructure, energy. So one of the possible options is to convey the messages about the environment in the context of development, like where we're heading, and what consequences it will lead to. And the other option is for popular journalism. um, we could give personal stories. People are fond of personal stories, and they are memorizable, like this lady with the stray dogs from the shelter, or this tickets, volunteers selling tickets to the zoo for the future. These are personal stories, keep people inspired and motivated, and this creates new visions and new opportunities. I can see that Natalia also wants to add a couple of words, but let me also tell that the interest of people in the environment um, was actually cherished by concerns and fears, and not some positive things, because Chernobyl and Zaporizhia nuclear power plants are all about concerns and fears. This means that probably we should not follow the way of motivation, but the way of fear and concern. I think we should combine these two options. But here is another important point. We are talking about the future, but there are the points of concern as for now, and sociology is responding to that. Um, we have the CMISO report, environmental challenges during the war, and it is really interesting. We may speak about current challenges because there are three top challenges as outlined by the respondents. That these are the environmental consequences of the war. This is radiation threat, mining of agricultural and forest areas, and the spread of poisonous components, poisonous substances, because there is shelling industrial enterprises. But besides that, we have pollution of water reservoirs, soil waters, lack of drinking water. There is no tap water in Mariupol. We can see that there is the epidemic going on because there is no drinking water and there is no tap water. And epidemics cannot be stopped by the borders or demarcation lines. And the epidemic is also the language of fear. Yes, but on the one hand, the language of fear is also important. It's important to state what the threats are, because that makes us be more attentive to certain problems, and it helps us develop their prevention strategies. But this motivation is also important for the future, because colleagues have been right in saying that we will be rebuilding the cities, and during the rebuilding of the city, it's important to take into account all possible innovations of environmental designation, like the zero energy city. Why not? We don't have those awful Soviet times when it was possible to lay down bad engineering networks and to sell everything else just to become wealthier. We need now to create the pragmatic world, and at the same time the idealistic world from the point of view of standard compliance and environmental preservation. Um, Thank you. If you have any questions, just raise your hands. Irina Maronova. public organization Zero Waste Lviv. So my first question is a specifying one. How did you select the 10 priority topics which you researched? Because it seems that the way you ask the question will predetermine the answer you get. If you don't include the issue of waste into the questions, you will not get this topic raised in the results. But we can see that the topic of waste coming from the destructions of civilian residential infrastructural facilities and the topic of biological waste, because we're talking about poultry factories, farms in Kiev region, and some other things like the bodies of dead people who are, which are becoming fertilizers or vice versa will become toxic. So a lot of memes related to environmental topics is impressive because a lot of memes have been dedicated to environmental issues. I think that this is a question more to Oles. Yes, sure. So definitely every survey really depends on how you word, how you formulate the questions. And definitely the categories we have selected do not embrace absolutely all the problems and challenges present in mass media and that are relevant now in the context of the war. We have selected the categories that in the previous surveys supported by the International Renaissance Fund were already researched and were used. They were used for interpretation purposes. And we selected the ones that seemed to be, because of our analytical intuition, to be relevant as for now, or not now, but over the period of the study. But in general, the environment and war topic was developed not only as direct coincidence as elements of content analysis, but we may state that it was possible to outline some topics and to see which of them in general correspond to the topic of the environment. You mentioned the elements of like the stories of poultry factories, and probably there is also the problem of disposal of perished representatives of the Russian army and their bodies, which constitute an element of pollution. This is related to the topic of pollution, but I think that back then Ukrainian media did not interpret it through the prism of pollution, of environmental issues. And that's why we didn't formulate it as our search, as our inquiry. Let me stress that this survey is not an exhaustive one, is not a well-refined academic study. This is just a view, a perception of the problem, a kind of a kick-up, the starting point. And the findings of our report are shared by us because we just wanted to share it to launch a wider discussion in the society, a discussion that would be related to the aspects which seem to be important for us. Pidluska, so you're welcome.
Hello, my name is Joe Enga. I'm an American working for Estonian Public Broadcasting. And I also worked as a policy analyst in the United States for a think tank. And whenever I hear policy, I always think, where's the money? So is anyone aware of Ukraine suing Russia to seize control of their assets? Because we've frozen the assets in America and in Europe, taken their mansions, their yachts, but they legally still belong to them. So I think there's a great legal basis for Ukraine to go to the international court and have those assets transferred to funding what you're talking about and the rebuilding of Ukraine. Are you aware of any moves in that direction?
Thanks for the question. This is really very important areas. You know, there's a lot of efforts of Ukrainians to document the damage which has been caused by the Russian aggression. That also involves documenting the damage being caused to the environment. It's part of the complex research. I haven't heard specifically of any lawsuits or any action already taking place. So we are at the stage of documentation yet, but definitely that needs to be included because the damage, we now only say that the damage is overwhelming, it's huge and so on and so forth, but the documentation work is still in process, and definitely I think that's something to be pursued.
Another source of funding might be a modern Marshall Program, like after World War II, with Europe and the United States to help rebuild and implement your program. I'm just interested also, it's not that, well, I guess semi-important. What's up with the peacock?
What's happening with?
The peacock that got killed.
What does it mean, peacock?
Peacock, the bird.
Which is? Oh, the peacock. I don't know.
There was a story, a young man killed peacock. No, peacock, and showed in his social media on Facebook. So a lot of people ask about police to catch him and get to the prison.
Oh, dear. Thank you.
Але от коли ми там говорили.
But when we are talking about different Marshall plans, I have the following question. We have been talking about rebuilding, about recovery and Marshall plans, but how do we do it for our environmental or ecological component, because I don't know whether it's more academic or more practical, to be preserved? I mean, a great money comes after the victory for rebuilding, for plant building, for road building, airport building, and this will be the language of money. And everywhere where we have the language of money, the environmental component may disappear because the question will be, is it quicker or is it more environmentally friendly? So how do we do not to lose this environmental component during the recovery of the state? Well, just a brief initial answer. Well, first of all, really, there is a risk because quickly means that environmental standards will not be followed. And whether, well, it's a great question whether the attention to environmental issues will further be paid, and that is the matter of control from the civil society. I think that our civil society has already developed the principles for the recovery, including the principle for taking into account environmental standards that definitely need to be applied and need to be a part of the recovery process. That is not going to be easy, but anyway, attention to those issues will be there. Well, let's have a look at this. This could be a bilateral direction, two-way direction. On the one hand, we as Ukraine need to ensure the funding for this recovery plan. We hope that there will be a lot of international donors to support this, from the EU in particular. And we as the state really need to secure those green components in this red war. Of course, we do realize that if there is a need to rebuild the bridge already now, that will not work. But if we speak about some long-term prospects, definitely we must take into account all those green transition issues. So on the one hand, this must be our initiative launched by us as a state. But on the other hand, there must be some preventive mechanism applied by the people who provide the funding, and that will also work. Because if the EU gives the funding for the recovery of a certain enterprise, or if we speak about some private investment coming to Ukraine, nobody will ever invest money into dirty production. That is clear. But we know a lot of examples when the Europeans did this and they were not concerned about this. Well, but now we have a different story because of the changing trends and because of the preventive mechanisms and with the taxonomy which discusses what is to be included, what is not to be included. So I think it will work in a different way. So this is the situation when the civil society can work not only with the authorities, but trying to persuade the authorities that these issues need to be included, but also with the donors in order to make them convinced to establish those red lines for Ukraine, where we could go, where we can't go. Natalia would also like to add a couple of words, and I like to add something from me. So, our candidacy status became possible because of the voters, because the politicians realized that either they support Ukraine and they win in the election, or they don't support Ukraine and they lose in the election. Also, you mentioned the Zelensky initiative about tree planting, and most probably the echo component in the recovery program should also be kind of voters-based, constituency-based. So here is the question: should the civil society not go through this red tape? Probably we should exert pressure on the politicians and on the decision-making process via their constituency, the voters' inquiries. Well, I think that my answer is going to be traditional. If you want to get a result, it's necessary to use all possible opportunities. You need to exert pressure on the politicians. You need to carry out initiatives to apply for grants. But let me add a couple of optimistic things here. First of all, the EU-Ukraine Association presupposes compliance with specific environmental regulations. This is already a curbing factor for abuse. And we have not mentioned one important element. Our people who are now staying in Europe stress that they have assessed they appreciated the functionality of our financial system. Why? Because it is the most advanced. We were the last to introduce it. That's why it's rather flexible. It's mobile, it's fully digitalized. So I think that when we start rebuilding our enterprises, our civilian quarters, we will also take not the drafts and the design projects that are 40 years old. We will take new ones. And within the competitive Western society, where one of the priorities is environment and resource saving, they are taking this component into account. Nobody will develop an absolute type of building or company for Ukraine. They will just take whatever they have from the range of the latest ones, and it will be much more eco-friendly than the things which were built in the Soviet times. Azovstal, let's take it. Was it 60s? Yeah, 50s or 60s, right after the war. Or take the Interpipe, which was built at the beginning of 2000. How much more eco-friendly and energy efficient company this is. Why? Because of advanced technologies and new designs. So if we take the recent designs, that will be already a progress. Thanks a lot. So I think that this has been a really fruitful and useful discussion about environment or ecology as a science and the war and the role of environment in our lives. So here is Ina Pidluska, Deputy Executive Director and International Renaissance Foundation, Oles Lisnychuk, leading analyst at Umberto Analytical Group, and Natalia Andrusevych, Chair of the Board at Society and Environment Resource and Analysis Center, and Natalia Zaitseva-Chipak, Sociologist, CEO at Socioinform, a well-known company dealing with social surveys. Thanks a lot. See you.